පේන්ට් කරන්න සහාය අවශ්‍යද? පේන්ටි TC ගයිඩ් එකක් නොමිලේම ලබා ගන්න මිස් කෝල් එකක් විතරක්ම දෙන්න.
We can identify the importance of IMF fund facility under four main categories or four main areas. Number one, with this fund facility, Sri Lanka is able to be a credit-worthy country again. In particular, this gaining that is important in the context where, as we know, most activities related to imports, exports and other private sector activities were affected with the declaration of the default status in April 2022. With the IMF agreement, Sri Lanka again is able to basically engage in international business activities and other transactions, including obtaining loan facilities. Second, Sri Lanka received 2.9 billion worth of credit. In addition to that, it is expected that this allows us to borrow from World Bank, ADB and other multilateral and bilateral sources in order to bridge the financial gaps in the short run in order to facilitate importation activities as well as basically lower the inflation, interest rates and facilitate domestic economic activities, basically to allow economic activities to expand. Third and most important thing, as I see, is the economic program, the economic reform program that Sri Lanka could carry out with the assistance of IMF. In particular, as we know, most of the proposals made in the IMF economic policy framework relates with some of the measures that Sri Lanka must take in order to address the root causes of the current economic crisis. As we know that Sri Lanka continued borrowing heavily due to the budget deficit, and government of Sri Lanka had a higher public expenditure due to loss-making entities and revenue position. Sri Lanka had a relative to GDP. Sri Lanka the tax revenue counts around 8.5 to 9% of GDP. Certainly, Sri Lanka has to increase this to say 15 to 16% over the time. These are some of the actually the proposed policy reforms that Sri Lanka should have taken earlier. And if taken and continued it in such a policy framework, Sri Lanka would have avoided this economic crisis. Now, in order to carry out the economic policy reform program under the IMF facility, I think it is required that the government receive support from all the political parties as well as trade unions and the general public. We need to make sure that we will not get into a similar crisis in future. As India did in 1991, India was able to basically have a bi-partisan agreement on main economic policy framework where the successive government continued the policy reform package and made sure that competitive and business-friendly environment prevail regardless of which party in power. So I think this is time for even Sri Lanka to have a bipartisan consensus on the major economic policy reforms and continue so as to make sure that we will not get into another crisis and seek assistance from either from the IMF or from any other country.